The frozen silence. The wind howled like a beast across the ice fields. Snowflakes danced in the air like tiny blades, cutting through the night. A dark cave sat at the edge of a broken cliff, hidden under a thick sheet of white. Inside that cave, an alien mother held her child close. Her name was Selinar. Her skin was pale violet, now turning blue from cold. Her lips shook, and her arms wrapped tightly around her small daughter, who looked no older than 3 human years. The child didn't cry. She was too weak to cry now. Selinar looked at the small fire she had made. It was dying. All her clothes, her robe, her blanket, even the scarf she wore on her head were already in the fire. Burned. Gone. She had nothing left to burn, but she had kept her child warm. That was enough. The child, named Lyra, was sleeping. Her tiny body was wrapped in her mother's only remaining piece of cloth, a sash once used for carrying food. Now it was a blanket. It still smelled like Selinar's fear. Selinar leaned back against the cave wall. She was tired. So tired. Her thoughts wandered to her husband, taken by soldiers many nights ago. He had fought back when the aliens, who ruled their colony, demanded more food. He had paid with his life. Since then, she had been running and hiding, with a child too young to understand and a heart too broken to fight. Now there was only cold. Her stomach growled, but she didn't care. Her eyes closed. Maybe if she slept, the pain would go away. But then, a sound. It was soft at first. Low hum. Then it grew louder, like an engine. Selinar opened her eyes. Her body screamed in pain as she moved. She crawled to the cave's edge and peeked out. A red light blinked in the sky. It was a drone. Her heart jumped. A rescue drone, a patrol, human, alien. She didn't know. The drone passed overhead. It shined its light down the snow trail, but not inside the cave. It didn't see her. It was going away. Selinar felt panic rise in her chest. No, she whispered weakly. Please. She turned to her daughter. The child was still asleep, but barely breathing. Selinar couldn't let her die here. Not like this. Using the last of her strength, she picked up a rock and banged it against the cave wall. Clang, clang, clang. The drone was gone. She fell to her knees, her vision blurry. Her legs had no strength left, her hands were ice. Still she crawled outside, her body dragging across the snow. She waved her arms. She screamed, though no sound came out. She collapsed. The snow kissed her bare skin, freezing her even more. Then, footsteps. Not hers. Not a soldier's. Heavy, strong, and slow. A tall man in a thick jacket stood at the edge of the trees. His face was covered, but his eyes were wide when he saw her. He rushed over, dropping to his knees. He touched her neck. She was still alive. Then he heard a soft, dry cough. The man turned toward the cave. Inside he saw the child, curled up like a fallen leaf, barely moving. The man didn't waste time. He pulled a warm blanket from his bag and wrapped the child. Then another for the mother. He lifted the woman gently into his arms. She didn't fight. She couldn't. With both in his arms, he walked back through the storm. Far in the distance, the snow kept falling. The world stayed cold. But now, a little warmth had returned. Selinar didn't know yet that her life had just changed. She didn't know the name of the man who carried her. But she had felt something, just before she blacked out. Kindness. Not from her own kind, but from a human. Jackson sat beside the small heater inside his survival pod, watching the alien mother and child sleep. The pod was warm now, filled with the quiet hum of recycled air. He had wrapped the mother in his emergency blanket, and the child, so tiny and fragile, rested inside his own sleeping bag. Snow still pounded against the metal walls outside, but the storm no longer mattered. Inside, there was life. He leaned back in his chair and stared at them, still trying to understand what he had found. He was on a supply run, alone. His small ship had detected a heat signal out in the wild. That signal had led him to the cave. He never expected to find them there. A mother who had burned everything to save her child. It haunted him. Her skin had been turning blue from the cold. Her feet were bleeding, her arms were raw from the ice, and yet she had smiled weakly when he placed the warm cloth around her daughter. Even in pain, her first thought had been her child. Jackson respected strength, but this was something different. This was love he couldn't explain. The alien mother stirred and groaned softly. Her eyes blinked open. Violet eyes, tired and full of fear. She saw him. She sat up quickly, pulling the blanket over her chest. Jackson raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said calmly. "You're safe. Your baby is safe." She couldn't understand his words, but his voice was gentle. She looked beside her. The child still slept, warm and peaceful. Her lips quivered. Her hand shook. She looked down at the blanket, confused, and then at him. Jackson nodded slowly. "I found you in the snow," he said, pointing to the heater, and then to her. "You were cold, dying." He placed his palm on his chest. "Jackson," he said. "My name." "Jackson." She blinked, then pressed her hand gently to her chest. "Selinar," she said softly. Her voice cracked with weakness. It was the first word she had spoken since waking. Jackson smiled. He repeated it carefully. "Selinar." She nodded. She tried to sit up straighter, but winced. Her body was still sore. Jackson stood and opened a box of rationed food. He poured some hot water into a cup and handed her a protein drink. "Drink this," he said. "It'll help." She sniffed at first, cautious. Then, seeing her child still safe, she took a sip. Her hands trembled. She hadn't had anything warm in days. Tears filled her eyes as the warmth touched her throat. She held the cup close like it was a treasure. Jackson watched her silently. He didn't want to ask questions, not yet. But in his heart, he knew. This wasn't just a random refugee. Something bad had happened to her, something worse than the storm. He stood up and walked over to a shelf. There, he pulled out a small device, a translator. He tapped it a few times, then held it out to her. "Try speaking," he said. Selinar looked at the device and slowly spoke. "I run from bad ones." The device translated her native words into slow, broken English. "They take my mate. Want child. I run. No food. No clothes. I burn all. For her." She looked down at her daughter. "She live, or I die." Jackson swallowed hard. Her voice, even with broken grammar, hit him like thunder. He had heard stories of slave camps, forced labor, stolen children. He had just never expected to meet someone who escaped from that. Not out here, on a frozen planet with no name. He knelt beside her. "You did well," he said softly. "You saved her." Selinar shook her head. "No. You save." Jackson didn't know what to say. He had just followed a signal. But now, in this small pod, he felt something heavy settle in his chest. A responsibility. A connection. The child suddenly stirred and whimpered. Jackson reached over and gently picked her up, cradling her like she was made of glass. The child blinked slowly and stared at him. Her small fingers reached for his beard. She giggled softly. Then, with sleepy eyes, she curled into his chest. Selinar stared wide-eyed. No one, no male, had ever touched her child with such care. No fear, no disgust. Only warmth. She covered her mouth, her eyes flooding with tears. Jackson looked at her, confused. "What's wrong?" She shook her head. "Nothing," she whispered. "Just never see human like you." Jackson smiled. I'm just a mechanic, I fix things. He looked at the sleeping girl in his arms. Maybe I can fix this too. Outside, the storm was still wild. But inside, for the first time in days, a fire stronger than flame was lit. It wasn't from wood or fuel. It came from human kindness. The storm outside screamed like a wild beast, but inside the small shelter pod, everything was quiet. The warm air hummed gently from the heater, wrapping the room in a soft, invisible blanket. Jackson sat on the floor beside the cot, watching, as the child, Lyra, slept peacefully on her mother's chest. Selinar had fallen asleep too, her arms still wrapped tightly around her daughter, as if afraid someone would take her again. Even in rest, she looked alert, ready to run, ready to fight. Jackson didn't move. He didn't want to disturb the peace that had finally come to them. He sat back, thinking about the last few hours. He had never seen someone so broken, yet so strong. That mother had given up everything, her food, her safety, even her clothes, just to keep her daughter alive, and somehow she had succeeded. Barely. Jackson stood slowly and walked over to the small supply cabinet. He pulled out a pair of old patched pants and a thermal shirt, human-sized but soft. Then he found a child-sized thermal wrap, usually used for emergencies. He laid the clothes on a nearby chair. If they woke and needed them, they'd be there. He poured some warm water into a cup and placed it near the sleeping pair. Then he checked the pod's systems, battery low, supplies tight, but enough for now. Outside, the storm still howled. There was no going anywhere for at least another day. Maybe two. They were stuck together, but Jackson didn't mind. When Selinar finally opened her eyes, she panicked. Her hands immediately searched for Lyra, but the child was safe in her arms. Still, her eyes darted around the room until they landed on Jackson. He was near the console, heating a small container of food. He turned, smiled, and pointed to the warm drink beside her. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here." She didn't answer, just stared at him. Her eyes were sharp, suspicious. But when her daughter stirred in her arms and gave a sleepy yawn, Selinar relaxed. She gently sat up, keeping Lyra close. Jackson walked over slowly and handed her a spoon. "Eat," he said. "You need strength." She looked at the food, then back at him. Her pride resisted for a moment. She had begged no one. She had relied on no one. But her body was too weak now. Her daughter needed her strong, so she accepted the spoon, one bite, then another. The food wasn't good, but it was warm, and that was enough. Lyra woke up slowly, blinking at the light. She saw Jackson and gave a sleepy smile. She didn't cry. She reached her tiny hand toward him and he responded with a gentle touch. Selinar watched closely. Her child trusted him. She didn't know how to feel about that. It scared her and comforted her at the same time. Jackson picked up the translator again and tapped it. "Storm, still bad," he said, pointing outside. "You stay, safe here." The device translated his words. Selinar nodded. "How long?" "Storm," she asked. "1 day, maybe 2, Jackson answered. She looked down at Lyra, who was now chewing on a small fruit bar Jackson had given her. "We not go. Not now," she said firmly. Jackson smiled. "No need. You're not alone anymore." Later, that evening, they all sat near the heater. Jackson handed Selinar the clothes he had prepared. "These, for you," he said. "Warm, clean." She took them with shaking hands, her eyes wide. She touched the fabric gently, as if it were made of gold. "Thank you," she whispered. She hadn't worn anything but rags for so long. She helped Lyra into the small wrap and dressed herself slowly, carefully. When she was done, she looked at Jackson again, this time not with fear but with quiet respect. Night came, and the lights in the shelter dimmed. Jackson lay on the floor with a thin mat, letting mother and child take the only cot. Selinar didn't understand him. Why would a male, especially a human, sleep on the cold floor for her comfort? She looked at her daughter, now warm and safe, and then at the man who had given everything without asking anything. Something inside her shifted. She pulled her blanket tighter, not from fear but from confusion. This man was different. She didn't understand why yet, but she wanted to. As the wind outside screamed and the snow slammed against the pod walls, a different kind of silence filled the room. A calm silence. A shelter not just from the storm but from the pain, from the fear. For the first time in many nights, Selinar closed her eyes and felt hope. Morning came slowly on the frozen planet, and the storm finally began to fade. Thick layers of snow still covered everything outside, but inside the shelter the heater hummed steadily. A soft light glowed on the walls. Selinar opened her eyes to the smell of something warm. Not smoke, not burning cloth. Real food. She sat up quietly, careful not to wake Lyra, who was still sleeping beside her, holding a half-eaten snack bar in her little hands. Across the room, Jackson stirred a metal pot with a plastic spoon. Steam rose into the air, carrying the smell of something soft and sweet. He looked over and saw her awake. He smiled. "Good morning," he said gently. She didn't understand the words, but the sound was kind. Selinar reached down to fix Lyra's wrap and carefully lifted her daughter's head onto the blanket. She stood up slowly, still sore, still healing. She walked to the corner where she had placed her old boots, cracked and nearly useless, and stared at them quietly. Jackson walked over and handed her a warm cup. The translator rested in his other hand. "Drink, warm," he said. She took the cup and nodded. After a sip, she said softly, "You help us. Why?" Jackson paused. He looked at her, then at the child sleeping peacefully. "Because you needed it," he replied. "And because no one else did." The translator echoed his words in her language, and Selinar's eyes softened. She sat down on the floor across from him. There was no table, only a heat lamp between them and 2 cups of warm liquid. "You alone?" she asked through the translator. Jackson nodded. "I was doing a supply run, alone. I saw a signal in the ice. Wasn't supposed to stop." He gave a small laugh. "Guess plans change." Selinar tilted her head. "You, human, help aliens?" He nodded again, slower this time. "I help people," he said. "Doesn't matter where they come from." She looked down at her hands, remembering how many had turned away when she begged for help. Alien and human both. She took another sip, thinking. "You speak truth," she whispered. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "What's your story?" he asked, keeping his voice soft. Selinar hesitated. Then slowly she spoke. "We live near the mines. My mate, Darnak, worked there. No pay, just scraps. When he said no more, they took him. They came for us next. I ran. Took Lyra. We hid." Her voice cracked. "Storm came, food gone, I burned clothes, couldn't let her freeze." Jackson listened without interrupting. When she stopped, he didn't ask more. He just said, "I'm sorry." 2 words. No translation needed. Selinar looked into his eyes. There was no pity, just understanding. She had never seen that in a man before. Not from her kind. Not from any kind. Lyra woke soon after, yawning and rubbing her eyes. She saw her mother and crawled into her lap. Jackson walked over with a small bowl. "Try this," he said. "It's sweet." The child looked at her mother first. Selinar nodded. Lyra took the spoon and tasted it. Her face lit up. "Yummy," she said in her soft alien accent. Jackson laughed and even Selinar smiled. It was the first smile she had allowed herself in many days. Later, Jackson pulled out a flat tablet and placed it between them. He opened a basic language program and pointed at the screen. Let's talk, he said. He typed the word water, then pointed to her cup. Water. Selinar repeated it slowly. Tear. Then she pointed to the heater. Jackson typed, heat. She nodded and repeated that too. They continued for hours, simple words, simple lessons. Each one built a small bridge between their worlds. Lyra joined in, giggling at some of the sounds. She pointed at Jackson and said, "Who, man?" He laughed again, nodding. Yes, human. Selinar learned fast. She was quiet, but sharp. Jackson noticed how quickly she picked up new sounds and repeated them. She asked questions, even though her voice was still soft from weakness. He admired her strength, the quiet kind that didn't need to shout. When the lessons paused, she looked at him and asked something he didn't expect. "You stay after storm?" Jackson's hand froze over the keyboard. He looked up. "What do you mean?" The translator echoed her words again. "You leave or stay?" He leaned back. "I don't know. I hadn't planned to bring anyone back. My ship's small, but..." He looked at Lyra, who was drawing shapes on the metal wall with her finger. "Maybe plans can change again." Selinar watched him closely. Her heart beat faster, though she didn't know why. She had trusted no one. She had learned not to. But this man had done nothing but give. No demands, no threats, just warmth, food, and kindness. She said quietly, "You are strange human." Jackson smiled. "I get that a lot." And in that moment something passed between them. Not love, not yet. But a thread, a beginning, a chance. Outside, the snow was still deep. But inside the shelter, words had become more than just sounds. They had become a way forward. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of silence and white. The snow outside the shelter pod lay heavy and untouched, like a blanket hiding all the pain beneath it. Jackson stood outside, brushing ice off his ship's antenna, while his breath came in visible puffs. The wind had calmed, but the cold still bit deep. He worked fast, wanting to fix the signal booster so he could check the skies. He knew this much peace never lasted long. Inside, Selinar sat on the floor with her daughter curled in her lap. Lyra was drawing with her finger on the cold metal wall, making circles and strange alien symbols. Every now and then she glanced at the door, as if sensing something coming. Selinar's fingers twitched with worry. She didn't like being still for too long. Her instincts screamed that someone would find them. Not someone kind like Jackson, but someone else. Someone cruel. When Jackson returned, he brought news she feared. "Scanner picked up a small patrol ship passing near," he said, tapping on the translator. "Didn't land, but it was close." Selinar's face froze. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak right away. "What kind patrol?" she asked slowly. "Didn't catch the ID," Jackson replied. "Could be yours. Could be slavers, could be worse." She stood up, her arms tightening around Lyra. "We must go," she whispered. Jackson shook his head. "Not yet. It's too cold, and my ship needs repairs. One more day." Selinar looked at the wall, then at the door. Her eyes flicked, toward her child sleeping again, unaware of the danger. "They look for us," she said. "I feel it." That night she barely slept. Her ears were sharp, listening to every sound. Jackson stayed awake too, doing quiet work on his tablet. He didn't tell her, but he had seen something else, an encrypted signal bouncing through the snowstorm. Not just a regular scan. It was tracking something, maybe someone, maybe her. He didn't want to frighten her, but she already seemed to know. As morning broke, Lyra was the first to rise, rubbing her sleepy eyes and reaching for her mother. Selinar tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Jackson handed her a protein bar and a cup of warm broth. "Eat fast," he said. "We'll move today." But they didn't get the chance. Before they could finish packing, the alarm beeped. Jackson looked at the console. A motion alert, then another. And another. "Visitors," he muttered. He glanced at Selinar, who had already scooped up her daughter. "How many?" she asked. Jackson looked at the screen. 3 life forms, armed. Selinar whispered, "Scouts. They track me." She grabbed her torn bag and looked around for somewhere to hide, but there was no time. A knock echoed through the shelter walls. Not soft, not gentle. Jackson stepped forward. "Let me talk," he said. He walked to the hatch and pressed the intercom. "Identify yourselves." A gruff voice responded. Terran signal detected. "Open. Routine inspection." Jackson narrowed his eyes. "Routine? Out here?" The voice was cold. "Refugee laws show passengers." Jackson shut the intercom and looked at Selinar. "They want to see who's inside." Selinar backed into the corner, holding Lyra tighter. "If they see me, they take her," she whispered. Her eyes begged him. "Please, hide us." Jackson thought for a second. Then he grabbed a large supply crate and opened a hidden compartment in the back wall. "Get in," he said. "Quiet, don't move." Selinar didn't argue. She climbed inside, pulling Lyra close. Jackson closed the panel, sealing them, behind the storage bin. It looked like just another wall now. Then he turned and opened the hatch. 3 armed aliens stood there, tall, thick-skinned, dressed in dark patrol gear. Their eyes scanned the pod instantly. "Traveling alone?" one asked. "Yes," Jackson replied calmly. "Just me." Ship broke down in the storm, waiting for the parts to thaw. Another alien stepped forward. "Your scanner shows 3 heartbeats." Jackson shrugged. "Maybe." "You picked up my emergency med kit. I had to use it last week. Still active." The soldier raised an eyebrow. "We'll look around." Jackson didn't move. "I don't think so," he said. "You don't have clearance to enter a human-registered pod." The soldier smirked. "You're a mechanic, not military." Jackson's hand moved near the emergency alert button. "Want to test that? I send a distress beacon now and we'll both be talking to High Command in minutes." The aliens stared at him, then at each other. After a long pause, they turned around. "Next time, don't hide fugitives," one muttered. Jackson didn't answer. He closed the hatch and locked it. He waited a moment, then walked to the panel, opened it carefully. Selinar and Lyra were still curled up inside, silent and frightened. "They're gone," he whispered. Selinar stepped out slowly, still shaking. You protected us." Jackson nodded. "Of course I did." Selinar looked at him, her voice trembling. "Why? You could get punished." He knelt down and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Because you're not fugitives. You're survivors. And I don't leave survivors behind." In that small shelter, something deeper was born. Trust, the kind that only grows in danger. Outside, the snow had started falling again, but now they were no longer just strangers in a storm. They were a family. In the making. The wind picked up again the next morning, blowing soft snow across the open plain. Jackson stood outside, tools in hand, trying to finish the last repairs on his small ship before more trouble arrived. Inside the shelter, Selinar fed Lyra warm broth with her hands, using a clean cloth like a spoon. The little girl giggled quietly between sips, her cheeks finally showing color again. But behind Selinar's eyes there was still fear. She hadn't spoken much since the patrol left. Her body was in the pod, but her mind was trapped in old memories. The way those soldiers had knocked, the way they had looked around, the way one of them had said, "Don't hide fugitives," before leaving. She knew what it meant. They'd be back. Jackson stepped back into the pod, wiping snow off his face. "Ship's ready," he said, checking the translator. "We can leave soon." Selinar looked up. "Where?" she asked. "There's a human outpost 2 days from here," he replied. "Safe, hidden, and cold enough to keep scanners confused." She nodded. "Will they follow?" He looked into her eyes. "Maybe. But if they do, they'll find me waiting." That afternoon, Jackson began packing supplies into the ship's storage bay. Selinar helped quietly, loading the food and water packs. Lyra walked between them, carrying a small doll Jackson had made from cloth and wire. Everything felt like it was moving toward peace. But peace never lasts long in places like this. Just as they finished loading, the sky roared. A patrol ship larger than before cut through the clouds and dropped fast. Jackson grabbed Selinar's arm. Inside, now. They ran into the shelter as the ship landed hard, kicking snow into the air. The hatch slammed shut and Jackson locked it. He pulled Selinar and Lyra into the ship's cockpit and pushed them down behind the seats. Stay low. Don't speak. Heavy boots thudded against the ground outside. Then, pounding fists slammed against the pod door again. But this time, they didn't wait for permission. With a screech, the patrol soldiers used a laser cutter and forced their way inside. Jackson stepped forward fast, blocking their path. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted. The lead alien soldier pushed past him. "We were right. The heartbeat scan wasn't wrong." Jackson placed himself between the entrance and the rest of the pod. "You have no right to barge in." The soldier raised a weapon. "We follow orders. Hand over the female and child." Jackson didn't move. His heart pounded, but he stood tall. "They're under my care. Human Protectorate Law, Section 7. The soldier narrowed his eyes. "You're not military." "No," Jackson said, voice calm but firm. "But I'm a citizen, and I claimed them under my protection. You'll have to go through me." The room went still. The second soldier raised his gun. "We will." But then Lyra let out a soft cry from behind the chair, and the soldiers heard it. They began to move, but Jackson pulled out his emergency beacon and held it up. "Take one. More step and I'll launch this. Human base will hear everything, then you'll be the ones hiding." The lead soldier froze. He looked at Jackson's face, reading the truth in his eyes. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Jackson didn't blink. "No, I won't." The soldiers turned, growled something in their language, and stomped out of the shelter. Their ship roared back into the sky moments later, disappearing into the clouds. Jackson stood in silence, breathing hard. Then Selinar stood from behind, the seat holding Lyra. She looked at him with wide eyes. "You could have died." "Yeah," he said with a weak smile. "But I didn't." She walked closer, her face unreadable. "You fought for us." Jackson nodded. "They were wrong. You're not fugitives, you're survivors." Selinar stepped closer, her voice was shaking. "No one ever stood between me and danger, not even my kind." Jackson looked down at the child in her arms. "You both deserve a chance at life. I just gave you space to breathe." Selinar reached out, placed a hand on his chest. "You are more than human." Jackson didn't know how to answer. He simply placed his hand over hers. "And you're more than alien." They stood in silence, eyes locked, hearts beating fast. Then, without another word, they boarded the ship. As the engines hummed and the ship lifted from the snow, Selinar sat near the window, Lyra in her lap. She watched the white world fade away below them. She didn't know where they were going. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid, because someone had chosen to stand for her. And that meant maybe, just maybe, they were no longer running. The stars drifted quietly past the ship's window, cold and far away. But inside the small vessel, warmth lived. Not from the heater, not from blankets, but from something deeper. Jackson sat at the controls. One hand on the steering grip, the other resting on the side panel, tired but peaceful. Behind him, in the small living space of the ship, Selinar braided her daughter's hair. Lyra hummed a soft tune, something her father used to sing before everything went dark. Now, in this quiet cabin, the child felt light again. Selinar's hands moved slowly, carefully, her fingers no longer trembling from fear or frostbite. She paused every now and then, watching Jackson's reflection in the glass. She still couldn't believe it. Just days ago, she had burned her own clothing to keep her daughter from dying. She had no food, no fire, no hope. Now, she had this. They had been flying for nearly a day toward the human outpost. It wasn't a grand place, Jackson had warned. Just a small settlement with engineers, traders, and old soldiers. Most of them tired of war, tired of laws, tired of cruelty. But it was safe. Safe enough to start over. Jackson had arranged for them to stay in one of the spare quarters. Not big, not fancy, but warm and private. A place where no one would ask questions. Selinar had listened quietly when he explained it. She hadn't said much, but the way her eyes glistened told him everything. Later, while Lyra napped under a soft human blanket, Selinar stepped into the cockpit and stood beside Jackson. "You, not ask for anything," she said softly. Jackson turned to her and smiled. Didn't have to. She sat down in the seat next to him, resting her hands in her lap. Many males take, some trade help for body, some just take without asking. Jackson's face tightened. "That's not help," he said. "That's cruelty." She nodded slowly. "But you give everything and ask for nothing." Jackson looked at her, his voice quiet. "Because helping you helped me too." She turned toward him, surprised. "How?" He leaned back in the chair, looking at the stars. "I've traveled a long time, fixed machines, saved strangers, earned pay, moved on. No one remembered me. I didn't mind. But when I found you and Lyra, something changed. I didn't feel alone anymore. I felt needed." Selinar swallowed hard. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "We need you. Not just for ship. Not for food." She paused. "We need you." Jackson turned to look at her fully. For the first time, her eyes didn't hold fear. They held something softer. Trust. Gratitude. Maybe something even deeper. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Her fingers wrapped gently around his. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said. "Not while I'm here." She nodded. "I believe you." When the ship finally landed at the outpost, they stepped out together, 3 figures walking down the ramp, not strangers anymore, but something like a family. A few workers glanced their way but didn't ask anything. Jackson was known for helping people. No one questioned when he offered a space for the mother and child. That night, in the quiet room they were given, Selinar tucked Lyra into bed. The girl was tired but smiling. "Mama," she whispered, "this is soft." Selinar kissed her forehead. "Yes, little star, it's soft." She stood by the doorway after Lyra slept, watching Jackson finish setting up a heating unit in the corner. He worked with quiet care, making sure every wire was safe. When he looked up, he saw her watching. "You can rest now," he said. "It's safe." She stepped forward slowly and took his hand again. "Not just safe," she whispered. "It's home." He didn't answer right away. He looked into her eyes. Then, softly, he pulled her into a gentle hug. She rested her head on his chest, hearing the steady beat of his human heart. It was strong and kind. She remembered that first night in the snow, the fire, the hunger, the fear. And now here she was, held by the same man who had saved her without asking why. Outside, the cold stars watched from above. But inside, in a small outpost on a forgotten world, an alien mother and her child had found something they never expected: safety, kindness, and a man who had lit a new fire in their hearts, a fire that would never die.